Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel and welcome back to another video which is going to be a continuation of the InstaClone app that we've been creating. In the previous video we sort of built out this UI with all these placeholders and what have you here using texture. So this entire list view here is using texture and different nodes and different node types. So in today's video we're going to look at converting some of this placeholder text and labels and where our images should be, these purple boxes, into some relevant data. So I've created some JSON which I'm just going to drag across into this resources folder that I've created, and once that's in there we'll open it up and we'll take a look. So this JSON here, let's close this side so you can see more. This JSON here is just basically going to be two arrays. So we've got two arrays. We've got one for the stories, which eventually will add this header to the top like we do with you see on the Instagram, the stories. And then we have a newsfeed here, which is another array which consists of a user object, which that has a user ID, a username, and a user profile image URL. And then we have the image URL outside of the user object, which basically will sit in this placeholder here. We've provided an aspect ratio, we've got a likes, and potentially if the person has commented on the post on the picture, we've added a last comment object as well. So the purpose of today's video is we're going to be building out the models and mapping the data to those models. So yeah, that's the intention of today's video. So let's get started with building our models. So first of all, we're going to need to create a new folder or new group, and we're going to call that model, like so. And then inside that we're going to create a new Swift file, and we're going to call this base. We're going to call this base data source, like so. And this is going to be where we create our arrays of class. This is going to be a struct actually. This is going to be where we create our arrays of stories and newsfeed items. So we have our stories and our newsfeed item here. So we're going to be using the codable protocol. So we want to make this adhere to codable, like so. And then we're going to just have two properties in here called var stories. And this is going to be an array of stories. STORIES, like so. This is going to be optional. And this is going to be an array of newsfeed. Newsfeed. And that is, yeah, an array of news feed, like so. And again, that's optional. So the reason why we're getting these errors is because these objects don't exist yet. So we'll create them next. So our next one we're going to create is we're going to create our stories. Our stories object. So this is going to be called class. This is going to be a struct as well, actually. Struct This is also going to adhere to codable. And then inside of here, we're going to have the two properties. If we look at our JSON, we've got two properties. One is a user object and one is a boolean to say whether we've actually watched the story or not. So we'll create those. Var is watched, and that's of type bool. Now that this isn't this wouldn't really be optional because you don't have it. Has it been watched or has it not been watched? True or false. But for now, we'll just make that optional, and we're going to have a user object as well. So this is of type user, and that's optional as well. Then we need to create enum and this is, we're going to use the coding keys here. And if you've seen my previous video, where we made a comic book app, the whole point of the coding keys is because in our JSON, we may have a scenario where, in actual fact, I'm going to change that to be like this, so that I can give you an example of what the coding keys do. So, in our model here, we've got is watched with no underscore, but the server will want to send us some data that looks like this, is watched. So, the whole point of these, the coding key is to convert that so that it maps correct. So we make that coding key and do that, and then in here, that needs to be a comma like so, and then in here we need to say case user, and because our user doesn't need to be converted, we just leave that blank. And then here we'll say is watched like so, and then we need to say equals, and then string is underscore watched like that. And this is complaining because we don't have a user object yet. So if we look at doing the user object next, we can at least stop that one from complaining. So we'll create a new struct called user. This is also codable, and that's that. Then here we're going to have a var user ID, and that's of type int. That's optional. So yeah, so we've got int, string, and another string. So we'll have var profile image, and this is a string, optional, because they may not have a profile image, or normally you'd have a default one, but we'll make that optional. And the username, string. And we need to do our coding keys again, enum, coding keys, like so, and then we need string coding key, like that. And our user ID needs to be, so our username we don't need to change, but our user ID, case user ID equals, we need to change because we have an underscore in the JSON like this. So we need to convert this so that our models that we're creating knows that we need user underscore ID needs to be associated with user ID camel case. and then we do case profile image, and then actually we're going to make that profile image URL, because that's what it is. It's a URL string, and then that convert to that, and that should be no errors in that. And if we go back to stories, this should eventually go green. Yep, newsfeed doesn't exist yet. Stories, yep. Okay, so with that in mind, let's have a look at building out our newsfeed object. So it's a new Swift file, and this is going to be called newsfeed. Newsfeed, like so. And then this is another struct, news feed, and this is codable, and then our fields are going to be var user, because we're going to have a user associated to the news feed. So who created the post. So we already have our user object, so we just say user. That's optional. Var image URL. So this is going to be the URL of the photo. That's of type string. Var aspect ratio. Actually, these could be let, because they're never going to change. Not in the newsfeed anyway. They would be static. In actual fact, the user object coming from the server should probably be let, because then it's never going to change. The only time it would change is if you went into a settings section and edited the user details, but that would be a completely different model. I would have thought it would be like editable user, and then you'd have a bunch of different properties in there. And this is going to be a double. Could be a float, could be a double, and we'll have to convert that because we're going to use screen ratios and stuff like that. So we'll convert that later. And we're going to have likes. So this is going to be the number of likes that you. At the moment, we have a static value of 10 in each cell. So that's going to be this is going to be an int, optional, because you may not have any likes. So yeah, we'll make that optional. And if you don't have any likes, the server may not send it because it make the payload smaller. So yeah, we'll make that optional. Let last comment. This is also gonna be a new object called comment. That's optional as well, because you may not get a last comment come back from the server. And then let I think we got is post ID. Let's have a look. Yeah, post ID. Date added. We can. It's not necessary. I added it in there. It's not necessarily needed in this model, but I added it in there just to say that when you added the photo or whatever. But we're not going to use it in this example. But if you wanted to take the project and extend it yourself and have a play around with it yourself, there's that option to show when the date was added, the actual image was added. So last comment, what did we get? Oh, post ID, and this is of int, optional as well. So again, we need to do our enum, coding keys, string, coding key, like so, and then we're going to have a case, user, and likes. They don't need to be adjusted to compensate the different attribute being sent from the JSON. I mean, I could have written this JSON to match the properties. I already knew in my head what I wanted to do, but I could have just mapped them accordingly. But I wanted to just give a true representation of how the backend would actually potentially send the client the JSON in a more server-like format. There's no preference. There's no real correct way of doing it, but I just wanted to give a more true representation of how you may potentially get data from the server and the attributes and their names, so that you can get your properties set up and the coding keys. And it's just good practice. It's just more of a practice exercise than it is like you have to do it like this. There's no right or wrong. So we do image URL, and that's going to be let's revert back to our JSON. It's going to be that one. Copy that, paste that in there like so, and then we're going to have case aspect ratio. Look at our JSON again. Case. Last comment. And finally, we need the post ID. Case post ID equals post underscore ID, like so. So this, we just need to create our comment model, which we're going to do next. Command N, call it new Swift file. I'm going to call this comment. It's another struct. Call it comment. Codable. And then we need to create comment, last comment. We're going to have a comment called string. This is going to be let comment. This is not going to really change on the actual feed, so we can make this a let. Oh god, I can't spell. String optional, and then let, then actually we'll that won't be optional, because if there's no comment, then there's no reason for these to be optional, because they just won't appear. Actually, yes, we will make them optional. Then, because then we can do checks in our UI, because we haven't actually built the last comment section that will appear under the likes. So we can do further checks against these optional values here when we come to render the UI. And then, oh, we need a user. I think it's a user. Let's check. Yes, user. So in here we need to do user, and we already have our user object, so we just go user, and that's optional as well. And if we build, everything should just bind and be, and we should get a build succeeded, which we do, which is all good. So now, for this to work, we need to create an extension but I'm going to cheat because I actually stole this off of from I think it was from Paul Hudson, who has the Hacking with Swift channel. He did a tutorial ages ago, and I kind of like stole this extension. So yeah, big up Paul for that one. Let me just create a extensions group. But I can run through what the actual file does. Let's just find it on my desktop. Where's that gone? Show and finder. Yeah, there you go. Found it. Cool. Okay, so I'll run through what this does. So basically, this is using an extension of bundle, and when it's using, we've got this decode function which takes in some a generic type and returns us a generic type as well. So basically we are going to pass in the file path, which is our JSON here, and first of all it will try and create unwrap the file path. If the file can't be unwrapped, we'll create this fatal error and say can't locate that. Once that's done, if we are successful on this, if this block is successful, we'll go into another guardlet and we'll try and unwrap the some data. So we'll try to from the URL, we'll try to convert that URL into data. And if that fails, then we'll create a fatal error. And say that we can't load the file and we can't convert it to data. Then we initialize a JSON decoder object, and then because this throws an error, we will do a do catch block. So our first one will be to say that we do, and we have been able to convert the data into our model type, and we'll return the base data source. Basically, that's what we'll get returned there. We'll get our decoded JSON into a mapped model. If it fails, then we run through a whole bunch of different errors. So like the key is not found, or the types a mismatch, a value is not found, or the data is corrupted, and each one of those will give us a fatal error with some reason as to why we can't unwrap the JSON if we get past these two guardlets at the top. So hopefully that gives you an understanding of what is going on with this this block of code here. Again, if you have any questions, put them in the comments and I'll try and answer them. I am quite active with people that comment, and and I'll try and explain it better in like the next video. So moving on from there, we are now in a position where we can try and unwrap our JSON in the file that we've created, this JSON file. Not unwrap it, we'll try and convert that, map that to our models, and then render that in our table view. So we've got this data source file here. And this was when we set up in our very first video of when we started building this app. So the link for that will be appearing at the top, and I'll put a link to the playlist of this entire series in the description below, so you can kind of follow along if you're just joining us for the first time here. So here we're going to create a function, and we're going to call this fetch data. And this fetch data function is just we're going to call this fetch data from local path. So this is where we convert our JSON file to our mapped objects, our map models. So here we need to do, first of all, we need to create a new variable. We're going to make it private because no one needs to know about this. I'm going to call it data source. So this is going to be our base data source, like so. And then in here we can actually this optional that we create here, we can actually now set that equal to the bundle dot main dot, and we should have access to our decode, which is there. And the type we want to convert it to is a base data source dot self. So we're telling our JSON file that it needs to map itself to this model, and then we need to pass in a path to that. We need to pass in a path to the to where this is actually held. So that basically we need to just give it the file name. So the file name is going to be called insta clone dot JSON, like so. Then from here we can then reload the table. So we're going to now create a closure called reload table view. Is a doesn't return, it doesn't do anything, it just returns void as well, and it's just for us to trigger that because this data source line 17 is actually what this returns is actually an optional, so we need to try and make sure that we can unwrap this. So we say data equals data source, like so, and then you can do something like present an error here, like couldn't fetch data or something, alert view, yeah, whatever, couldn't can't find data. But for now I'm going to create a fatal error so that when I come to run this I know that there's something wrong. Yeah, because if I leave that empty for debugging purposes it could just drop into here and I wouldn't know unless I put a breakpoint there. But so for now we're just going to put a fatal error, but I would recommend just putting an alert view so that you could just say, well, couldn't fetch the data from the server or whatever, because this obviously JSON is representing the response you'd get from the server. You wouldn't actually put it in your project. So now we need to trigger our closure, which is the reload table view, like so. Then where we are using our data source, which is in a presentation, we'll create a private method function, closure setup, and then our data source, which we've initialized up here on line 14, data source, we are now going to listen to that closure, like so, and so that we don't get any sort of retained cycles or anything like that, memory leaks, we're going to do our weak self in, so that we can say self dot table dot reload data. So weak self is, it could be unowned because it's very unlikely that it's going to be nil, but weak self just says that it potentially could be nil, and that's why you get this optional as well. So It's very unlikely that it will be nil in this instance, but just in real world scenarios, just be prepared that it could be nil. So that's, and then we just in it we just need to call closure setup like so, and we also need to call data source dot fetch data from local path. So if this all goes well, if we build and run, we should end up at that breakpoint if everything's gone to plan. It hasn't. So let's go into here and see what's going on. We didn't crash, which is something. You go into there, and let's see what our data source is. Data source. Yep, looks like we've got some data there, so that's all good. We go into there. Close your setup. Let's print something out. Oh, I know why. That needs to idiot. That needs to go in front of there. Because yeah, it was just the ordering in which I was calling these. So now if we build and run that, because we actually fetched the data, this closure was not being triggered because it didn't know it needed to be triggered. So if we go into there now, yeah, we hit that breakpoint. Yeah, it was just the ordering in which that was being done. So we needed to declare the closure first before we actually fetched the data from the local path. That was silly. So yeah, that's all good. So we're now reloading the data, which is cool. As you can see there, we've got our reload data print statement. Let's get rid of that. So now we need to, in our newsfeed cell, in our data source, we need to fix that. We'll just do that. So we now need to say data source dot number of rows in section, data source dot newsfeed dot count, because that's an array, and we'll just say we want to return 0 if we can't unwrap this. Then in our newsfeed cell, we want to create we want to not make this an override anymore. We want to make a custom init. So we're going to pass in the feed now, and it's of type newsfeed. and then that way we can then create a var news feed, and this is an optional news feed, and then we'll just set self.newsfeed equal to feed, like so. And then we will have a populate method down here, which will then populate all of these different items here. So if we now head on back to our data source, which is here, we need to make a change here because we now need to allow for the feed. So we're going to create a let feed. This is going to be our still this section here, like that. And then we need to say, that's optional, and we need to say index path dot row, like so. And this will give us a single instance of the actual feed, so just give us one feed item object and pass in feed into there, which is all good. So now if we build and run that, we should see that we should have more cells or less cells, I can't remember. Yeah, we seem to have a few more cells now, which is cool. So if we now head on over to our newsfeed cell, and we'll first of all we'll get this little icon here changed, this green placeholder image, we'll get that changed. So we're going to create a populate private func populate method, and this takes our this feed item, feed, and news feed. That's optional, and we need to open and close. Then in each one of our nodes that we've created, each one of these nodes here, we need to create a private an open function called populate. So we will just steal that from there, pop that in here, like so. 1, 2, and 3. Oh, we already have that here, but we're going to change that now here to feed news feed, like that, and this up here needs to now go, which is what we set up in the previous video. So now we have a number feed dot likes, that'll give us that, and that will give us the number of likes in each of the cells. So that one was pretty straightforward to sort out. Then in here, in our header node, we'll work on this one next. We need to first of all we'll set our image node. So profile image dot URL equals URL string, and we need to do feed dot user dot profile image, and if we can't unwrap our profile image, we'll just provide it an empty string. You could just get away with passing in the user in this instance, which, yeah, we'll do that, we'll pass in a user, and then we don't have to try and extract the feed out of that, and we'll convert that to user. And then in our newsfeed cell, in our populate method, we'll have header node dot populate. It's not picking it out. Let's build populate like that, and then we'll just do feed dot user, and we're passing in our user object into the header node, because that's all we really care about, because this is just going to be their name, and this placeholder here is just going to be the actual the profile image. So now we need to change this, move that out of there, and we need to pop that into here. And rather than being texture is cool, we're actually going to go user dot username, and if we can't unwrap that, we'll just provide in a unknown user, like so. You wouldn't really do that. You would unwrap, but in this instance, we know 100% that there's going to be a user name. So now, if I now rebuild this, hopefully, if everything has gone together smoothly, we should see some names and profile images. And we don't. So let's see what has gone wrong here. Am I actually calling? No, this is very important. Populate feed, and then do self.newsFeed. So yeah, basically I forgot to call the our populate function, our private function, inside our newsfeed cell in our init method. So hopefully now, if we do that, we should see some data appear in the top of the... There you go, Baby Mario. We've got some images coming in. We can get rid of that hideous green background as well now. So yeah, we've got names and profile images, which is cool. So let's head on over to our header node and remove that green background image, that green background color. Where is it? Green. There, that line there. If we remove that and then rebuild, we should see the profile icons appear. And there you go. We have names and we have profile icons appearing, which is really cool. So the next one to look at is the feed image node. So I've randomly gone out and looked at some really nice landscape images that we could use for this project. So first of all, we're going to throw the images in and ignore the aspect ratio, and then you'll be able to see what the images look like and how much better it is when you provide it with a decent aspect ratio. So we're going to get rid of this line here, purple, and we're going to keep to our height of the UI screen dot width, the main dot bounds dot width divided by 2. And then in here we just need to do image node dot URL like that, and then it's going to be URL string like so. Whoops. And we need to do we don't need to pass it in that string. We need to do feed.image URL like so. And then if we go back to this and then do feed, what do we call it? Feed image dot populate. Feed image dot populate, and then pass in the feed. Now when we rebuild we should no longer have this purple section, and we should have our images I've put in the JSON, and they're some really nice high. Oh, and that's optional, so we need to provide it an empty string if we don't get that URL. In a real world scenario, you would probably put like a placeholder image in. You know, you could have a fallback URL or something like that. So as you can see, the images are being read from the JSON that we provided. They're these URLs. They're just random images I found of like different landscapes on the web. Yeah. So as we're scrolling through, they might take a little while to pop in. You could put like an activity indicator or like a shimmer, like you see on Facebook. These are really high res images. You could do some downsampling or that sort of stuff. We may cover that in this or in another tutorial. But yeah, as you kind of scroll through, they take a little while to like pop in because they're just high res images and they're trying to squeeze them into these tiny little boxes. But if we look at the aspect ratio stuff now, that will actually help us because we can change the size of the image, so the loading time might speed up a little bit. So if we look at that now, if we look at feed image, and we look at the height, so this needs to be moved. So where you got setup node, we now need to like adhere to the aspect ratio. So we're going to now go times feed dot aspect ratio, and then if we can't unwrap that, we're going to provide it 1, and this is a float. This needs to be converted to float, so CG float like that. Now if we build and run, see all these images are the same size. As we scroll through, we should be able to see that these images actually change, are different sizes based on the aspect ratio that we specified in the JSON here. So as you can see, this one is a lot bigger now. This one is slightly bigger. This one is still like a letterbox size. This one's bigger. So all the aspect ratios are of different sizes now. So that's pretty cool. Yeah. So one thing I've recently found out about texture is that they're revising. I didn't realize this until recently, but they have a different where they've got node for row at. They have a different one called node. It's like node for block, node block for row at, like that. And they say that this one is is better for performance. So we're going to use this one instead of node for row at, because it's part of their documentation. They say to use this one instead. So yeah, they don't really go into much detail as to why. I assume it just pulls out chunks and then renders it in the UI. So it may help us in this instance to like render these larger images. They may not be as slow coming in as we're scrolling. Yeah, not entirely sure why, but I'm just following documentation. And our data source, rather than having a strong self-reference, we're going to have a weak self-reference to stop the retain cycles. So let's just tidy that up. Yeah, if anyone knows why is following along and is a bit more familiar with texture than I am, if anyone knows why they say to use this one instead of node for row app, leave something in the comments, and it'd be cool to open discussion up about it. So yeah, that's that done. So now we need to look at our social node, and we need to do our populate call our populate method here in the newsfeed cell, which is going to be social social node dot, whoops, oh, we called it social buttons, didn't we? Social buttons dot populate, news, passing the feed. And now we should start seeing, rather than seeing 10 likes on each image, we should see random numbers. And that needs to be an optional, which is there. Do that. That's all looking good. Yeah, so as you can see, we've got, this one's had 1,110 likes. This is 130 likes. This is just one like. This is 1,100 likes. Another 1,100 likes. 100. It's the JSON is just copy pasted. So we've got a small cluster, and then we just copy and pasted it so that we didn't. So we had like different length rows and stuff. So yeah. So that's how we're going to deal with. That's how we've kind of like used got our JSON. We've mapped it to some models, and then we're rendering those models in the UI and updating using aspect ratios, changing heights of image, and it just goes to show that with minimal code you can build quite a decent looking UI. I mean, yeah, you can say, oh, you got these white boxes, not like the performance is not amazing, but these are stupidly high res images I just found on the internet, and really you wouldn't do that in an ideal situation. You would have either the server send you a different size image based on the content that you're surfacing. You wouldn't really have like, I think one of these is like almost 4K size. Or you could even do some downsampling inside the app. We may cover that in this project, but there's lots of cool articles out there. In actual fact, I'll leave a link to one that I read recently about downsampling. It's more to do with UI kit, but yeah, it's a great article, and it might help. It might be more useful to if you read it rather than me trying to explain it. But yeah, so anyway, in today's video, that's kind of like a good stopping point for today. In the next video, we'll probably look at adding this last comment section node to the bottom that will sit underneath the like section, and then you'll be able to see that when you don't have a last comment, like in this example here, that it won't actually show. So there's a couple here that don't have comments. Yeah, so we'll be able to see that in the next video. But this kind of JSON structure is quite typical for something like this, where you would have a user object, the person who created the post, the image URL, the actual image, like an aspect ratio, number of likes, and the last comment. This is and then a post ID. The post ID would represent, like, if you went through to their profile, it would have you'll be able to explore like in Instagram, where you go to the person's profile, you have a collection view of their all their posts. So you would use that post ID, so that when you made a request to the server, you did just have the single view controller that says, I'm now requesting this post ID 400, please give me all the content back, and all the comments linked to it. Yeah, and like this date added would be useful for that purpose. So you could order it by date and stuff like that. So we're not using it in here, but I just thought, like, if anyone wanted to explore, if anyone's following along and wanted to explore this in a little bit more detail, like playing around with this JSON and adding new attributes and stuff like that, then yeah, feel free to do so. Yeah, so that's kind of like a good stopping point, like I said. Hopefully you've enjoyed the video today. We've covered a fair lot, a fair amount of stuff. So what coding keys are and what they represent, and how we can use them to map different attributes, attribute names coming from the server to our models, stuff like that. We've also used this bundle extension that takes generic type and returns the generic type based on the model that we're passing in. We've updated our data source. Again, if anyone is following along and is a little bit more familiar with texture than I am, please let us know what this node block for row at is why it's more performant over node for row at. I think it's because they do it in clusters rather than just individual rows. They do it in a big block. They take in the whole block and then render a load and then throw it back to the UI. I think that's why it is, but I might be completely talking absolute gibberish. But yeah, so please tell us why. Yeah, so hopefully you've been following along, you're enjoying the channel. Please feel free to give us a like, a subscribe, leave any comments below, and I will get back to you. And I hope you continue to have a fantastic weekend. I will see you in the next video. Bye for now.